Okay, let's do this thing. All right, everybody. I am very excited for this episode of the Evolving Man podcast. Folks, before you do your intro, let me speak about how I came across you and the story that you're telling in your documentary. About a couple of years ago, I came across an Indiegogo or a GoFundMe campaign for this documentary. And the question was posed, addiction is one of humanity's largest problems with very few solutions. And can psychedelics help? Essentially, this is what I remember. And I was like, yes, I will fund that thing. And I gave you guys a very small amount of money. And that documentary has now been completed, long since done, and gone through the festival circuit. And I finally have an opportunity to interview the directors and the star of the documentary. And I'm happy to have you folks on the show. Please introduce yourselves. And the documentary is called DOSED.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us. I guess I'll start then. As you said, I was featured in the documentary DOSED. It documents my journey from addiction using psychedelics to recover from 10-year plus addiction to opioids and other substances. And my name's Adrianne.
Welcome.
I'll go second, I suppose. So my name is Nicholas Meyers, and I am a producer of the film DOSED, and it's just a pleasure to be here. Thanks for reminding me of what I already knew, which was that you were one of the early contributors, and it was so cool when you reached out to us after that and said that you had this podcast, and now's the time. Let's do this.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I'm Tyler Chandler. I'm the director and longtime friend of Adrianne's and Nick. And yeah, this all kind of came together a little bit surprisingly. And, here we are, as you said, film festival circuit, winning some awards, doing some theatrical screenings. And now, DOSED is available for everybody to watch through our website, dosedmovie.com, or on Vimeo on demand for now. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm tempted to tell people to just shut off this podcast or this video and go watch the documentary, because I'm so confident that after watching it, they will come back to this interview to get some greater context on how this all came together and how Adrianne's doing now.
There will be spoiler alerts.
Yes.
In this podcast.
We will spoil some of the documentary. So if you want to jump into it now, go for it. I'm watching this as someone who's seen the film multiple times, and I've been eager to support this project however I can, because you folks are riding a wave, and in some ways contributing to the wave. This rising wave of discussion around psychedelics as medicine. And it's just a very important message. I mean, it's so important that I think you guys finally reached Tim Ferriss. I saw he emailed a link to DOSED in his 5 Bullet Fridays a few months ago, which was awesome. But yeah, I want to just give people some context on this film. What prompted you guys to want to make this film?
Originally, Nick and I were thinking about doing a documentary about something else, and we were kicking around a few ideas, and then just sort of through a few organic life events, one of which was that I did psychedelics. I did magic mushrooms for the first time. And, just with some friends, and had a good time. It was very interesting. There's some introspection and, appreciation for things that you don't normally think about, and having a good time. It wasn't a huge amount. It was a nice amount. So then, the next day I didn't feel hungover like maybe normal if we were drinking, to have a friend gathering. Right. And then I saw an article shortly after that saying that psilocybin magic mushrooms can help people with depression And it prompted me to read that, and I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting, because like I felt quite good after doing magic mushrooms, and it really sort of shifted my focus while I was on it. And then I discussed briefly with Nick, like, well, what do you think about this topic? So it kind of like went into the idea of topics, but we were still pursuing a different one. And then about a week after that, Adrianne texted me from a low place, feeling quite depressed and down. And then I asked her if she'd ever tried psychedelics. And from there, we had a bunch of conversations, and decided like that it would be important for Adrianne to try this for herself, and then also like if we documented her journey and it worked out, then we'd have something positive and helpful to share with the world. And what do you guys thought? I mean, Adrianne can explain a bit more, Nick can explain a bit more, so go ahead, guys.
Yeah, and before we go there, I just want to say that at the beginning of the documentary, you sort of outline this process, and within 5 minutes, I'm hooked for the rest of the film, because I want to know what's going to happen. I see these two eager filmographers or documentarians with their friend. You guys knew each other previously, which also adds a little more meat to it. Getting involved with this person who has an addiction. And at least for myself, as an addictions counselor, I've worked in 4 different treatment centers. I went through rehab when I was 15. I've been working with addicts for 15 years. I see you two guys fairly green, clearly very good at working with the camera. Like already, like there's some really nice cinematography stuff near the beginning. Getting involved with something that's pretty complicated and pretty heavy in someone else, and I was like, oh, what are these guys getting into? Like I want to see what happens here, and I hope it works out. But there was this like anticipation, like these guys read a few articles about microdosing, because that's the hot new thing, and sent that over to their friend and said, hey, like maybe this will work, and off you guys go on this journey. So in walks into the picture Adrianne.
Yeah, and it was pretty crazy how it all worked out, because I didn't really know much about psychedelics either. I didn't have any experience with psychedelics. I had heard over the years, like I was familiar with Gabor Mate's work with ayahuasca, and I'd been hearing more and more in the mainstream media about psychedelics and their treatment. They're used for treating, depression, anxiety. And I just the week before Tyler had mentioned this to me, I had heard about the clinical studies that were supposed to take place, I think through the BCCSU, using psilocybin to treat substance abuse. So this was really already on my mind. And it was just really serendipitous how Tyler just happened to mention that to me. And, the rest is history. And yeah, like you said, I don't think any of us knew what we were getting into. I had experience in treatment centers with counselors and therapists, but like this was all pretty new to Tyler, and I think they can tell you about that. It was probably pretty scary for them, and pretty shocking to see somebody going through all of this. By this time for me, though, this was just like normal life. Like it was just the way that I lived. So yeah, they can maybe talk about what their experience was. But yeah.
Yeah, Nick.
Yeah.
For you.
Yeah, it was really interesting because here we have somebody in Adrianne who has had all of the options that she's attempted with the medical system to help her alleviate with her anxiety and her depression and addiction. Nothing's worked for her, including treatment centers, including different medications. And so really, this is the last option. Psychedelics were the last option for her. She felt like she had nowhere else to turn. And we were concerned that they wouldn't work. Of course, you never know what a psychedelic might do when it's introduced into the mind of somebody that's already suffering from anxiety and depression. But so we were concerned that there might be some sort of adverse effect. You hear all sorts of stories of people jumping out of windows and these sort of old wives' tales or whatever you want to call it. But because the danger was so extreme for Adrianne, she could have overdosed from the fentanyl-laced heroin she was consuming every day. we knew that it was something that would be good for her to try, and also it felt like a very meaningful thing to be able to share with the world if it worked out. And along the way, as you saw, we were transformed from people who didn't know anything about psychedelics to people who are now advocating very strongly for the use of psychedelics, because we've seen how they impact people's lives beneficially, not only Adrianne's, but so many other people's that we've met along the way who have had great outcomes from their use.
Yeah. Yeah. I will say that the main reason that I wanted to be involved with this film from the beginning is because I went through treatment. I became an addictions counselor. I attended 12-step programs for 15 years. I did the like super duper clean and sober thing, except for certain other coffee and cigarettes and video games, like culturally sanctioned other addictive things to one degree or another.
Mm-hmm.
And in my quest for continual growth, around age 30, I spent like a year and a half thinking about whether to engage psychedelics because my life was good. And my real only intention was just to seek deeper spiritual connection and deeper healing. And I knew that essentially my healing journey would never be over. But I also was taking a big risk because I had a whole community of people around me that did not understand psychedelics, and they didn't. I knew that if I did that, I'm relapsed and I'm as good as gone to them, and that I would be pushed out of that community. So I considered it for a year, and I was surrounded by enough other supportive individuals who were clear-headed. And so I moved forwards with that. And I started with mushrooms and then ayahuasca, and I've done a few other things in the last 5 years. And the way that has created almost like a quantum leap in my healing and my growth, I knew that there was something there that I had contacted that a whole community of people don't ever contact because there's so many misunderstandings around psychedelics. And here we are at the beginning of this film with Adrianne, who by society's accounts is mentally unstable. And you're about to give her a psychedelic substance, right? And I say mentally unstable because we all know the story, like do not give a psychedelic substance to someone who's mentally unstable because it'll make them go crazy. But the reality is when you look at the life of an addict, their life is crazy. And there's this way that we see through that story and realize that it's not really the full truth, and that it's kind of muddied because you give psychedelics to an addict, and in many cases there is a profound shift in consciousness. I had Gareth Emery on my show already a couple episodes ago. Gareth, did I say Emery? Gareth Moxie.
Yeah.
I don't even know who Gareth Emery is. He's probably a musician or something. I had Gareth Moxie on my show, and we talked about his profound shift where he had a huge acid trip and he quit drinking. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I bring that up because it's something that I just want to address in the show, that the assumptions that we have about psychedelics may be just that. Some of those are just assumptions, and they're not necessarily based in truth. And we see some of that play out in this documentary. So let's maybe spend the next 10, 15 minutes like working through the story, maybe not spoiling everything. I don't want to spend the whole time talking about the story across the documentary, but I'd like to spend a chunk of time also talking about afterwards and where you guys are headed in the future. What is your agenda with this film or for psychedelic policy in the world? And I want to hear how all of your lives are doing post-doc. So if one of you could just take us through how the journey was for you, that'd be great.
Adrianne, do you want to mention? It's your story,
Yeah,
right?
probably.
Sure, I guess
Yeah.
I'll start. So yeah, I really appreciate what you said, because I also really had a lot of hesitation going forward with the psychedelics, because even though I was relapsed, I had relapsed. I had heard a lot of this, you know, and I was a part of this abstinence only community, this very like black and white view of what drugs were, what was good, what was bad. And that I had been really indoctrinated in those beliefs. So I was constantly questioning myself, thinking like, am I just substituting for another drug? Like, am I just going to be addicted to this? Because I really didn't know much about psychedelics. But, you know, after the first dose of mushrooms, and I think many people that have tried psychedelics, they become sort of, you know, advocates for it, because it is so profound and it makes sense. And I was just so sure about the path that I was on. So, you know, as you'll see in the movie, I tried psychedelics for the first time. I was still using heroin, and I was on methadone. I think I did about a gram of mushrooms. And that was a really pivotal moment in the movie, because that really propelled me forward. I had so many doubts, and I didn't know if this was the right move. And I'm sure if I'd asked any of my friends or family, hey, should I do this documentary about psychedelics, they probably would have said, like, absolutely not. That sounds crazy.
Yeah, right.
But I don't know what propelled me to move forward, and I just did it, you know. And then once I tried mushrooms the first time, unfortunately, I was still chemically dependent on opioids, but there was a shift. It was the beginning of a shift to something else, and I really just felt within my core that I was on the right path. So, yeah, and then you'll have to watch the movie to find out, but I guess me sitting here is a little bit of a spoiler. But yeah, it was a really profound journey.
And we should probably, you know, we should point out that although you were chemically dependent on the opioids at that point during the film, there was a shift, and we came to understand of another psychedelic called iboga, or ibogaine, which actually helps cut those physical cravings to opioids. And that part of the journey was just totally mind-bending and wild, because here you have this root from Africa which has this capability to make you not dependent physically, not go through withdrawals, not have to go to the doctors or the pharmacists, and get your opioid replacement therapies like methadone or morphine every single day, like so many people have to. But instead, you no longer have those physical cravings, right? So it's amazing that you can take this route, and that can happen. And for Tyler and I, when we're experiencing the aftermath of her taking this, I mean, we were pretty freaked out, eh, Tyler?
Yeah, when she went through the iboga ceremony for the first time, Nick and I thought she may have brain damage, and you know, you'll see that in the film. It's interesting to see like how it affects people so strongly, and you know, it lasts for a really long time. So it's very different than mushrooms in that sense. It not only cuts the physical cravings for opioids, but you know, it's quite a long psycho-spiritual journey. Nick and I haven't done iboga or ibogaine, so you know, Adrianne would have to like describe or explain what it's like, you know, to people. But as we understand, it's just like a long journey. But when Nick and I saw her the next couple of days after, we were really concerned, like, oh, she might be, you know, cured from opioids, but then like actually in a vegetative or infantile state. Right. And you know, we kept asking, like, is this normal? Is she going to come through it? And everybody there who's, you know, familiar with this medicine was like, yes, this is normal. This is what happens. It's kind of like being reborn, and you go through this process of recovery and healing. So after asking dozens of times, who knows, I think they were kind of sick of me and Nick, but we were just kind of worried and concerned for Adrianne, as we were the whole time, you know, even starting with going back to the first time she took mushrooms. Like, Nick and I didn't know exactly how to support her, but the goal was to support her the best way we can. And, you know, we figured that it might not work, and, you know, we probably wouldn't even continue filming, but luckily, whatever happened there, that one fateful day on the deck, it sort of blasted her out of her depression. And as Adrianne said, it really gave her a shift, that there was something to the psychedelics that she needed to explore. And so we thought and hoped mushrooms would kind of be, just what she needed. But as you come to learn, like it's a very challenging process, and everybody's story is going to be a little bit different. And when the opioids really were like, they're just sunk right in, and the mushrooms aren't quite enough to help somebody get over the physical withdrawals. And so it was actually Gareth Moxie, who's in the documentary, who gave us the reality check that, Adrianne really needs ibogaine or iboga at this point. Yeah. And then that was like a turning point in the film where things got a little crazy.
Yeah, I was speaking with, what was the man who was working with you at Iboga Soul, Adrianne?
Mark Howard.
Mark Howard. Yeah, I was speaking with Mark about it, and we were talking about the use of psychedelics like ayahuasca and psilocybin versus the use of ibogaine, and he was describing a tree, as a human as a tree, and the iboga treats the roots and gives you a foundation for your recovery. Ayahuasca and psilocybin they work more like on the higher planes and the upper levels. And so he said, like, you really need the foundation before you do this other stuff, and from my understanding I only understand this stuff up here. I also haven't done iboga, but I do feel this sort of like higher plane, higher consciousness thing going on with ayahuasca that it was like exactly the thing that I needed to reach what I was calling second stage recovery, which is this like this stuff that helped me work through my self-esteem issues, self-love, the real, like, feeling that real connection to the source of the universe. That was it. I'm still terrified to take iboga because of how physically demanding it is, and I'm just plain scared. So, Adrianne, I wanted to hear from you what was it like being on iboga? And I mean, you're also doing it in a particular context where you're like in this super foggy state with opiates in your system, like heavy amounts of opiates, and you're transitioning. So I'm sure your experience would be different from mine, being a sober dude going into it. But what was it like for you?
Yeah, it's definitely very challenging. It's really hard to describe what iboga is like, but I like how Mark described it to you. And it is a very long journey, and it's very physically and emotionally taxing. I'm still, I still often think and reflect upon my iboga journeys, and I think there's still a lot I have to unpack there because it does go quite deep. And it was quite powerful. And it's, I think, about a 36-hour journey. Like, you can't stand up or walk. You need help to go to the bathroom. But yeah, the first few times I did it, I was detoxing with iboga. So it was a bit different than a year later I did, after I had been clean and sober for a year, I did iboga again. And it was, again, I thought it would be a lot easier. I thought, like, oh, now that I'm detoxed, it's going to be a cakewalk. But it was definitely still challenging. The experience was very different. But it was definitely still quite a challenge. It was like being in a dreamscape, and I can't quite explain what it was like, but I could really feel that I was doing some deep work and revisiting some old wounds and some really deep emotional stuff. Mm-hmm. And it's definitely not as, if in my experience anyways, mushrooms, I've had very challenging trips, but at times it can be quite euphoric and light and very like up there. For me, iboga was not any of that. It was very, probably grounded. It was challenging, uncomfortable a lot. So I'm still scared thinking about my next iboga journey, but it's been a really powerful medicine that's helped me where I am today.
So, Adrianne, let me ask. So for folks who haven't seen the film, it's obvious that this interest in microdosing led these folks down a path to, okay, microdosing is not enough. We need a macro dose. And iboga came into the picture. Mushrooms also stayed in the picture. And Adrianne is alive and well and looking pretty darn healthy. So there's some spoilers there. But I wanted to ask you, what does your recovery look like? This is not, by my standards, this is not a traditional entry into addiction recovery, and you're clearly doing well. So, what has your recovery looked like? What keeps you going?
I think it's always evolving, and it's always changing, what recovery means to me and where I'm at. Definitely in the first year, it was relying a lot on the community, the plant medicine community, which for me too, this whole entry was very different than anything I had ever known or been exposed to. I still attended recovery communities, so I had that support. That was a little bit challenging because I felt like I was sort of in two different worlds. I had to what's the word I'm looking for? Reconcile those two. I had been sent very different messages from both worlds, but actually not really. The message is really the same, but just very different approaches, and just having to let go of a lot of the old ideas of what recovery looked like for me or what it had to be. So that was a challenge, but it was also freeing. I think just support and community and having friends, family, that was really important. I started floating. I actually started doing that before I even did the psychedelics. I did some neurofeedback. I had lots of people reach out to me and want to help me. It wasn't actually until the last couple months that I've really started focusing on my physical health, like exercising. It's a slow process, and I'm always trying to add different aspects into my recovery. I feel like coming into recovery was a real challenge. Like I could only focus on one or two things at a time. I basically had to relearn how to take care of myself and just how to eat, how to shower, how to do all those little things. So you can't take on, or at least I couldn't take on too much at once. There's the temptation to, I want to do yoga, I want to do this, I want to do all these things. But sometimes it's just as simple as getting up and eating breakfast and having a shower and brushing my teeth. And that was like a successful day for me.
Very true. I think people sometimes they don't understand the amount of time that it takes to rebuild an entirely new life. Mm-hmm. Addicts themselves do this with their own expectations on how life should be a year down the road, but so do the families of addicted people. So does everyone, and we think that you could send someone away to rehab, or you can do this like 30 to 60 day loading period and just reshape a person's life, and they're just going to be clear sailing, and the truth is that you slowly need to stack more and more growth on top of the previous year or the previous months, and keep growing. And one thing that I often used to say to people in treatment is that either you're growing or you're regressing, and that you just want to stay on that track, and if you look at the 12 steps, particularly, the whole point of the whole thing is to necessitate a spiritual connection that has infinite growth paradigm, and as long as you are seeking that growth in spirit, it's very unlikely that you're going to have any draw to escape or anesthetize yourself, which is what we're doing whenever we use drugs. We're just trying to anesthetize our pain or our stress. And if you're seeking that spiritual connection, that's your insurance policy, And so, I acknowledge your position and the difficulty that you encountered with reconciling multiple worldviews. Mm-hmm. And I do that with my clients, with my coaching clients. I tell them, like, listen, maybe we're working with psychedelics, but I say, go to meetings, and like, you don't have to subscribe to everything that program tells you. You know, you can go there and get the value and get the human connection and get the program. The program's great, and the advice and all of that, without being a hypocrite, you know?
Yeah, I think there's many paths to recovery, and that's one of the greatest gifts that I've gotten out of this experience, is realizing that there's no one, like, this is the road to recovery and this is what you have to do. It's opened it up a lot more for me. And it is true. It's, at the end of the day, no matter what path you choose, it's about having that spiritual awakening, so that you can grow.
Yeah. And you have to choose your own path. You can't choose someone else's path, you know, like that's going to get you to just the first step of recovery. But if you really want to, like, step into your own path, you have to just keep going and keep learning and bring in other influences, you know? So that was the best thing that I ever did, for my own personal growth, was step out of the box a little bit.
Yeah,
so I'm glad we could address that. Good.
And there's no magic bullet with psychedelics or anything really. It's constant work. You know, the psychedelics can give you the spiritual awakening. They can give you the self-love. They can give you, the freedom of opioid addiction. All of these things in Adrianne's case. But if you can't just be like, think you're going to do psychedelics once and then you're going to be good. It's, it's maintaining connections and a healthy lifestyle, and everything you do afterwards. Counseling before and after is important. Adrianne mentioned she was floating. For anybody who doesn't know what that means, that's float tank deprivation therapy is what floating is. So she was doing that actually before, not the mushrooms, but at some point she adopted some healthy lifestyle choices. So like after the mushrooms, it gave her the paradigm shift, and we kind of were doing more and more research into what sort of things are just like healthy for the body and the mind. And Adrianne was kind of sampling those, and the floating was definitely one that she did for quite a while, on a regular basis. And that was, I think, before and after the iboga, right, Adrianne? And
I was floating, I think, weekly for a good year there. Specifically after iboga, I think even before, I was trying to float at least once a week for a good year and a half. So that was really helpful for mindfulness and just practicing just being in my own skin, because that was really the challenge. I just couldn't be in my own skin. It's the most uncomfortable thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. I found floating to be super helpful in learning to sit in whatever my mind is doing, sit in my own pain, face myself in the darkness, face my fears. And we're really fortunate to have Float House here in Vancouver.
So many tools in the tool belt. Not any of them is a magic bullet, as we've been talking about, but one I think that we haven't spoken about that people might be interested in is not only did she do the mushrooms initially, Adrianne in the film, she did the 1 gram that she spoke of here or there.
2 grams.
3 grams, I forget what it was. But at the end of the film, as you saw, she had a heroic dose, right? She took what Terence McKenna would describe as a heroic dose and had a 6 gram mushroom trip, which is, I know, a topic that a lot of people are kind of giddily excited about, like, oh, have you done that much and what's it like? And so in DOSED, you have an opportunity to see someone taking that much and just, what it's like for them during and after that process. And I think it was a meaningful part of your recovery, right, Adrianne?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was grateful to have that experience after I had been off all the opiates and everything else. That was a deeply profound experience for me. I think that is where I would say I had that spiritual experience for me.
Yep.
Yeah, that was the moment, and everything just changed after that. But it was only because I had, like Mark said, the roots were in the ground through iboga, and I had been detoxed, and then I was able to have that just totally transformative experience.
Yeah. And I think seeing that on film, seeing you go through that, and seeing you sit here now years later saying that was one of the most profound experiences that I ever went through is really important for people. Because I think for the skeptics, they say like, oh, well, of course you can have this transcendent experience when you totally, like, your ego vaporizes and you lose all sense of everything and you're seeing all kinds of colors, etc. But how does that translate into actually affecting your life. But when a person is saying 2 years later, like, no, that truly did affect my life, and it affected how I see life, it affected my decisions. I'm certainly a healthier, more connected person as a result of that. It's undeniable at that point. And this is what we see with the studies on psilocybin particularly, is that years down the road, people say like, yeah, that was one of the most impactful, meaningful experiences of my life. And I quit smoking, and I, changed this and changed that in my life. These are statistically significant results.
Mm-hmm.
And it's no wonder that we're moving towards MDMA being legalized for therapeutic use, and probably soon thereafter psilocybin for some form of therapeutic use, whether it's for alcoholism or for depression or what have you.
Depression seems like what they're doing it for the clinical trials, but
yeah,
it helps with many things.
Yeah, end of life anxiety.
Together.
Yeah, I think that the end of using psilocybin to treat end of life anxiety is really important. I'm really looking forward to that progressing.
Yeah.
I think that can be very helpful for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, it's like our generation sees this stuff and we have these experiences, and then we look at our parents. Some of us have parents who used a lot of psychedelics when they were younger and they get it, but a lot of our parents don't. And it's like, oh man, how beautiful would it be for this to be so appropriate, and for there to be clinics like there are yoga studios that you can go into to have a spiritual experience.
Yeah.
It'd be beautiful. So the film finishes, and then you guys start touring it and taking it around to all these different cities and showing it. And what was the reaction that you generally got from people?
Well, I mean, dozens of cities all around the world. We couldn't attend all of them just due to time and travel constraints, but we would have like an alliance as a nice community with like psychedelic societies and stuff like that. So we'd let them know it's coming, and they'd maybe put on like a short Q&A after, and then Nick and I and several people in the film would do that when we can. And for the most part, it was like sold out or at least packed theaters. Like very positive response, standing ovations, that type of thing. And, nice chats with people afterwards as well. There's people that are curious about this for themselves, for their friends, family, loved ones. And, a lot of people, of course, then end up asking like, well, how can we access these services? And
right.
Unfortunately, they're illegal for the most part in most places in the world. We kind of went forward the way we did because there was no access to a clinical trial, for example, or as you mentioned, hopefully in the next year or two or three, there will be clinics where people can go and do that, with the legalization of MDMA or psilocybin or other psychedelics, so that they can have these experiences. But yeah, it was overwhelmingly positive, and we won 5 awards on the film festival circuit, and then after that, we did a bunch of screenings. We were actually supposed to have like a big kickoff in New York City in March, but the coronavirus ruined that, and that's when we realized, well, we could either wait until the virus sort of comes and goes, but not the uncertainty around how long that might take and how it sort of interrupted the theatrical tour that we were doing as it is. Just meant that we figured we should put it online so that everybody can go and rent or purchase it. And so it's on Vimeo now. And
yeah, what Tyler's referencing is after we had hundreds of like sold out grassroots screenings around the world, many different continents and everything. We actually, the response was so hot that we actually picked up sort of traditional regular distribution for a theatrical tour of the United States and Canada. And so we had our first, entry point to that tour scheduled for March 20th in New York. Right. And it was like March 15th that the theaters were shut down by coronavirus. So, what can you do, right? At least at this point, the film's available for people around the world that are struggling with disconnection, disconnected feelings that are associated with staying at home during coronavirus and social distancing and like that. So I know that anxiety and depression is probably sort of on a rise right now, and addiction issues during this difficult time. And so for the film to be available on Vimeo for people to see, I think is one good thing that came out of this.
For sure. Yeah. And what are the next steps? Is there a possibility of larger distribution of the film? What's the gateway? How do we make that happen?
Yeah, it's going to be on like iTunes and Amazon and Play and a variety of other VOD platforms soon. There's a backlog, as you can imagine. Lots of films are needing to pivot because theaters have been closed. There's also like some film festivals have reached out to us. They want to consider DOSED for their lineup coming later in the year. So we might sort of end up back in theaters depending on how things go. And there's always an opportunity, in certain cities and markets to, like bring this story back to theaters to, bring the community together, because that was such a nice thing. When you get hundreds of people together that are all interested and, curious and supportive of psychedelics. And, often we get questions about, like legalization and how to access, and like to be able to answer that for people is important. And, like just bringing people together. So, yeah, and then our distributor will be, knocking on the doors of Netflix and other places like that. But that's probably several months away, just due to backlogs and stuff. And Netflix generally, they're kind of tricky to read. So, I mean, it's like, are we going to end up on there or not? Well, like the good news is they're starting to bring more psychedelic related subject matter to Netflix recently. And so that's like a positive sign, because they really didn't have more than 2 films over the last several years on there. And, if you analyze that the way us as filmmakers have, it's like, Leonardo DiCaprio is like executive producer on one of them. And like, that's part, that's how it gets on there, right? We don't have Leonardo DiCaprio in our corner. But if we get like the support of people, and like they're leaving, positive IMDb reviews and, sharing it around. And like, we have had people that like know somebody at Netflix, like, yeah, just like keep, like sort of knocking down the dominoes or trying to open all the doors, then, hopefully eventually it'll be, by the end of the year, like available for everybody. More easily to access. But right now it is available to everybody. It's just maybe slightly less convenient, but
yeah. And that's probably the best way that people can support you folks at this time, is to go and pay to rent or buy the film, and to leave you an IMDb review for the time being. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I definitely encourage people to do that, and I'll leave the links for that. Adrianne, what is your life like now? What are you up to? What are you doing in the world?
Well, as we talked about, I've had the opportunity to go to some of the screenings. I went to Los Angeles for a film festival and a couple screenings in Vancouver, and been doing some podcasts and promotions, which has been very different for me over the last couple of years. But I was quite disappointed not being able to go to New York. We've been quite looking forward to that, and that was really exciting. But that's the way it is. Otherwise, my life is pretty calm and normal, and I quite like it that way. There's a lot less stress and chaos and pain and suffering. I just feel like I've been freed. Like, before all of this, my entire day, every waking moment was consumed with thinking about drugs. How am I going to get them? Where am I going to get the money? It's like, it was really exhausting because it was leading a double life. I was trying to maintain a job and like a normal life. Meanwhile, having this other life that I was leading. So it was absolutely exhausting. So I really just feel free from that. And, I wake up most days and I look forward to my day, which is not something that I ever experienced. And like I said, I have a lot of support in this community and other recovery communities, friends, family, reconnecting with people. I feel a lot less isolated and lonely. Even in this time of coronavirus, I still feel less lonely and isolated than I did when I was in active addiction. That's a really, really dark and lonely place to be. And I'm so grateful that given everything that's going on, I am where I am today.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, it was a very inspiring story. You're going to affect, and you already have, so many people just through allowing yourself to be seen in this way. And I know it's a particularly vulnerable space, having yourself up on a screen, and I'm sure you've gone through your own your own mental process dealing with watching yourself, especially in some of your darkest times. But yeah, I just want to say that, like, just that is so courageous, and that my friend Jordan Gray he writes blog articles for personal growth, and he says that, like, every one of his articles is like a little soldier out there that's working for him in the world 24 hours a day, and each article has its own agenda. Some are to, like, help people, move people away from suicide, or move people towards better sex life, or whatever it may be. But he said it's like it's always out there working for his agenda, and this piece is going to be out there sharing your story and inspiring people to look for a different way, forever, probably, right?
Yeah.
As long as it's out there on the internet, this story will always be there. And yeah, I think it's beautiful. And thank you for doing that.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, people have reached out to me, and that's the most meaningful part of this whole experience, is when people reach out to me and say that the film has affected them in some way, or that they've related to it in some way. I'm a little bit uncomfortable, like you said, being on screen. I'm not used to that, especially seeing some of my darkest moments. But it's all worth it. Just when someone will approach me after, or reach out to me on Facebook or by email, just to let me know that that movie helped them in some way, or just allowed them to cry, or to feel, or to know that there was someone else out there experiencing that, and that they weren't alone. So yeah, that's the best part of all of this.
Yeah. Nick and I, we'll receive emails as well all the time of people like reaching out and thanking us for, making a documentary and putting it out there, and thanking Adrianne for her courage and stuff like that. And then in many cases, it's a paradigm shift for them just to watch the documentary. So, they might not have like an immediate access to psychedelic services, which is unfortunate, but they're willing to talk to somebody and just start there. So if it opens a dialogue, some people may not even need psychedelics to turn their life around. If they can get the right counseling and other things like that, and that's just a good thing to do anyways, as you move towards the potential of having a psychedelic experience. And Nick and I always tell people when they're asking, like, how can we access it? We say, well, obviously, like, there are legal retreats in countries where it's legal. There's also underground networks, obviously locally in Vancouver. There's resources on our website, dosedmovie.com. And then, we tell people, like, depending where they are in the world, try to connect with a psychedelic society or a decriminalize nature movement, or even an organization like MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. Like, volunteer with organizations like this and go to their meetings and stuff. And you're going to create a new group of friends. And obviously these people are all very passionate about this. So you're going to learn a lot, and, you may find access that way, and get involved in something that is very meaningful and purposeful. And when people feel purpose in their life and value, it's another form of integration. And then you got your community and your new friends, and and then hopefully one day, legally or otherwise, you can, like, safely access psychedelics with the right support, like the setting and dose that's described in the documentary as well.
Yeah, beautifully said, Tyler. For people who are looking for access to this stuff, basically get involved with whatever your local community is and find the resources. that you're looking for through personal connections.
And we're frustrated too that like it's not available, to people, because the fact that it's illegal makes it, it's a little scary anyways, because people don't understand, like, what are they going to go experience, right? Like psychedelics can just, lend themselves to being scary to try in the first place. And then secondly, if it's illegal, then there's like that whole side of things as well. You don't want to get in trouble. But I lost my train of thought. But
well, we're in gray area, and you guys were in gray area when you were making this film, and people are doing their best right now, and they're doing the best with what we've got. And the truth is, most of these substances are safer than most people think they are. There are contraindications for things, especially like iboga, but I'm actually, the next episode I'm going to release after this one is with a man named James Gesso. He's a psychedelic pro, and we spend an hour and a half talking about how to design a trip for yourself. If you want a therapeutic trip, a psychedelic trip, how do you go about choosing the people, the stuff, and the set and the setting? And it's important to educate yourself in terms of what you're getting into, because what we learn when we're 15, 16 years old is to just like throw something in your mouth and go to a party. And it doesn't always end that well, and it's rarely therapeutic. But there's a whole other side to things that you can see when you're watching this film Dosed,
James
as well as others.
James Gesso is a great guy. He was one of the first people that we spoke with about trying to, connect with people who could help Adrianne. And we interviewed him, and we interviewed, Dennis McKenna, and like a whole bunch, Kalindi E, a whole bunch of people, and other people as well that were taking the substances. So like we had so many experts and other people. And then when the dust settled on the process of like what we were going to do with about 400 hours of footage, it was clear that Adrianne's story as like a case study was the most compelling, and then to take that into 84 minutes. But yeah, James is awesome, so it's great you're going to chat with him about that. He knows a lot, and he speaks at psychedelic conferences around the world.
Yeah, he's a fantastic dude.
And when I lost my train of thought, it came back to me. It was just simply that like the governments need to step up and allow access, whether it's special access or, like reducing regulations or decriminalizing. And, we've seen decriminalization initiatives in Denver, Oakland, I think Santa Cruz, and there's other ones. A hugely important one this year is Portland. I should say it's all of Oregon, but yeah, it's like the more that starts to happen, then the more access will become available. But like at the end of the day, it's the governments. They should not only be supporting these initiatives to make it safely available and allow proper education and re-education about these substances when they're used therapeutically and how beneficial they can be, but they should also be like funding people, in the sense that like the cost on society is so unbelievably huge when people are addicted to opioids or depressed. They can't go into work or like function normally in society. Anxiety is out of control as well, and psychedelics can help with that. And so when you're spending in the United States $500 billion a year to like fight the opioid crisis there, and then we have something like iboga and ibogaine, where yes, it's expensive, but when you heal people and then they don't need to be like hooked on this, there's going to be less policing, ambulance, hospital visits, overdoses, deaths, all of these things. It can actually shift and turn life around. But for a lot of people, they can't access these psychedelic services because like they just don't have the money to do that. So it's nice to see that some of the people we've worked with will like obviously some people can pay to keep it going, but like they're not really making a lot of money on it. And then they'll give back, and they'll try to work with underserved communities and people who are less fortunate that can't just like pay for an iboga retreat where you need a doctor involved or a nurse, you need a chef, housekeeping, like a place to have everybody, and everything that goes into it.
Yeah, the cost to society for psychedelic therapy is so much less than the cost of society for traditional medications and treatment centers. Like, as you know, people that take psychiatric medications, the cost that's paid by themselves or maybe their insurance companies is thousands of dollars a year in many cases. Whereas often people only need to take one dose of mushrooms, sort of just to get their head straight. People talk to me all the time about, once a year I take a 6-gram dose of mushrooms, and I just feel it like realigns my values with the type of person I want to be, and it makes me sort of feel connected to other people and to myself. And with iboga as well, it costs so much money for people to be on these opioid replacement therapies like methadone and morphine. The example that we used, or that we cited in the film, was that the government sponsors $6,000 every year per person that gets daily opioid replacement therapies from drugstores. So each individual that does that, they're giving drugstores $6,000. So it's big business for drugstores, for pharmacies.
Yeah.
And contrast that with potentially one iboga session, which would be much less money, and it would actually work to wipe away the need for opioids in many cases. Although, as we keep on saying, there are no magic bullets, and people still need to be ready to do the work and integrate into society and make all the right choices after taking these experiences with psychedelics.
Yeah, there's no doubt that treatment is much more effective than throwing people in jail or marginalizing them and shoving them off to the side. We've seen that in Portugal, where they decriminalized all drugs and they redirected all of the money that they were putting into drug enforcement into getting people into treatment, and their addiction levels have gone down and the crime levels have gone down. Like it's been a tremendous success. And inevitably that's what will happen in every area of the world that chooses to treat their sick people with the treatments that they need, rather than making their issues a moral or a criminal problem.
Yeah, this is a health issue, not a criminal justice system issue. And I believe that Portugal, if I'm not wrong, I think they had the highest overdose rate in Europe at one point, and after changing all of this, I think they have the lowest, or one of the lowest. And in BC, as many people know, we were in a public health emergency before coronavirus with the I think it was at 1.5 overdoses a day in British Columbia, which is just totally heartbreaking. So I've heard Dr. Bonnie Henry recently talking about changing drug policy, decriminalization, or better access. And we have done a little bit of that recently in Vancouver. But the criminalization of any drugs, not even just psychedelics, is not working. And that's abundantly clear that what we're doing is not working. And it's time to, do something different, because this is not working.
I agree. And I feel really moved to share my dream with you folks and the public at large here, because it's so, it's just right in line with our conversation here. My end goal, maybe my 10-year goal right now, is to start a treatment center in BC that integrates state-of-the-art stuff, all the stuff that we're talking about as needed in different stages of a person's treatment, that the treatment plans are individualized, and that there is, it addresses first and second stage recovery. And we're going to show movies. We're going to show your movie, and we're going to have a sweat lodge. There's going to be iboga if people need iboga at the beginning of treatment. There'll be a medical detox, and on the back half, on the aftercare piece, there's going to be all kinds of second stage recovery stuff, breath work, workshops, ayahuasca ceremonies, the access to one-on-one sessions like what you did at the end there, Adrianne, because this is what people need. And in BC, we put a lot of money into harm reduction, right? I came from Alberta. I'm from Calgary, Alberta, and I worked at treatment centers there. And there is money in the Alberta government put into treatment. And I worked at a treatment center that was funded by the government. And it was fantastic. We had a lot of staff and not a lot of clients, and they were in for 90 days, and the whole thing was covered by the government. And we had a fantastic success rate with these guys because we had 3 months with them. There was whenever there was 6 staff on shift, there was 10 clients. So it was like a very good staff to client ratio. And we used wilderness. We used the wilderness to get people sort of into their animal brain and challenge them in a safe atmosphere where they can't, there's nowhere to go. You just got to face yourself, and you're out in nature and you're getting a lot of the medicinal benefits of that. So I want to create a treatment center that is largely, funded by a portion of people paying full price for treatment, as well as donors. And then there's going to be a chunk of it, maybe it's 20-25% of admissions are pro bono, and people we filter them in based on need, and they come to treatment for free, because in BC there's not a lot of money for treatment, and there's a lot of money here. So what I'm doing over the next 5-10 years is making friends with as many millionaires as possible and sharing my mission, because more people need access to this kind of treatment here. They don't just need housing. We're making steps here, and there's safe injection sites, and there's we're going to get people into socialized housing, but people need a whole life support. They need a whole net.
More support, more holistic support, and longer term support. It's not just a 30-day program like we talked about earlier, and then you're done. And it's a lifelong process, years, of relearning and needing that support, and just a more holistic approach that takes in a lot of other perspectives, not just Western medicine. So that's really cool. I'm really excited to hear that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for letting me rant for a minute, folks. Okay. We're at about the hour mark. Is there anything that you folks want to share with my listeners? My listeners are fairly, I've talked about psychedelics from time to time on the show. I went on the Vancouver Real show and told my story. Talked about floating and had a few shamans on the show from time to time. But I just want to, is there any other message that you guys want to make sure that people hear about psychedelics, about DOSED?
Well, there's a couple things, probably. One thing that comes to mind is that, psychedelics aren't just for people that self-identify as addicted or mentally ill or whatever. I don't identify as either of those things, but I've taken high dose psychedelics since I started filming this journey and learning about it. And so has Tyler. And speaking for myself, and I think Tyler would agree, there's immense benefits that you can have for everybody. Everyone's dealing with something. Everybody wants a different job, or they're not happy in their relationship, or they feel blocked in some sort of way, or they feel unmotivated to do something. And as Paul Stamets, the legendary mycologist, as he says in our film, they mushrooms make you want to be a better person. They give you that inspiration to just do more and do better than what you've done before. And I think that's just such a key thing to remember. Yes, we need to have clinics where people can legally take psychedelics for whatever reasons that they want. And also, a lot of people are doing psychedelics right now on the underground, and having great benefit to them. So it's, it's not something that we'd recommend doing illegal psychedelics by yourself. You should do it with a trained therapist, and you should have the right amount of the right dose and the right safety precautions around you. But people are doing it, and some people are having great benefits, such as myself.
Yeah, and just to add to what you said, I was just reading an article the other day that someone was talking about their addiction to heroin, and how they said that heroin made them feel like the best version of themselves. And just what you were saying, Nick, about what Paul Stamets said is, I felt psychedelics gave me, they kind of smashed that illusion, and it actually helped me to be the best version of myself. And Trevor Miller always talks about, you know, psychedelics don't add anything to a person. It doesn't really change you as a person necessarily. It's just like you're looking at the world through this really dirty glass, and psychedelics kind of clean that glass and give you a new perspective and help you to be the best version of yourself, somebody that's already there. And it helped me connect with myself, because I had lost that. I had lost myself in drugs and alcohol. So
yeah, and if people don't know, you know, oh, isn't this just another drug? You know, aren't psychedelics just another drug? Okay, so now you're doing psychedelics. What's the difference between that and like cocaine or heroin or something? Well, it's a big difference. It's like if you do, you know, drugs of abuse like cocaine or heroin, they're really about, or alcohol, they're really about like, you know, masking your feelings and numbing out and just figuring a way to not be anxious and not depressed and just get through the day, or have fun with other people you might be uncomfortable with, or not face things that are in your subconscious that you don't want to deal with, traumas from childhood or whatever. Whereas psychedelics are like a completely different experience. It's about going right forward towards that thing that you're running from and meeting it head on and working through it. And that's why people, that's one of the many reasons that people don't get addicted to psychedelics. Firstly, they're anti-addictive. And secondly, it's usually a kind of an intense experience that you don't immediately want to try again. People that did 6 grams of mushrooms and just were like blown off the face of the earth, and like dealing with traumas and feeling connected to everybody around them for the first time in their lives, and self-love for the first time in their lives, and like are like exhausted and spent at the end of it. They're not waking up the next day and like, yeah, let's do some more, right? They're just like, don't even want to touch it for however long.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's an important piece to address. And in my own personal life, where I've come to in terms of what I do and don't put into my body, is my own personal code is I don't put anything into my body that's going to lower my consciousness, that's going to bring me down. Something that's going to, like what Adrianne was saying, like fog up my vision, you know. And despite LSD or mushrooms or ayahuasca giving me all kinds of visions that, you know, where I'm not sort of seeing the world quite clearly, I feel more clear and more aware of my own life and my own process. Like I can see through my own ego with those things. I can't do that with alcohol or cocaine or, and so those are sort of like two separate categories for me. And I hang out over here, and there is a line in the middle for me, things like MDMA, ketamine. I can't even name others, but there are these things that are very like, you can just go one way or the other with them, you know? And I mean, of course you can use mushrooms and acid just to party, you know? Try doing that with ayahuasca. Maybe you could succeed at that too. But it really does come down to, what is your intent with this thing? And that's where addiction lives, is like, why are you using this thing? You know, are you using this to escape, or are you using this to wake up? Because you can do both with amphetamines, right? With MDMA, you can transcend and understand and integrate your trauma, or you could just go dance at Shambhala.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, so I feel the exact same way about certain. I haven't tried MDMA because it would have to be the right time, and there would have to be that right intention with the right, you know, guide, because I can see myself really taking that somewhere else. And it is, like you said, I love that you said, it is all about my intention. And I always have intention when I go and do psychedelics. It's always like, okay, there's something going on, and I want to address this, or I want to look at this. And I have a very therapeutic and clear goal every time I do a sit with psychedelics. I personally do not use psychedelics recreationally for fun. I have yet to do that, and I'm not sure that that's ever going to be something that I'll do. For me, psychedelics are therapeutic, they're a medicine, and that's just me. I don't judge how anyone else uses them, but for me personally, as a recovering person with substance abuse, that's just where I'm at right now, anyways.
I can't do psychedelics recreationally. Like I've tried, but I always sort of like go inwards and start like planning the next 5 years of my life while my friends are like laughing and looking at, oh, that closet is moving, right? Like, so.
Yeah. I would also put cannabis actually in that middle category. Cannabis is a very wily thing. It's like, you can really go one way or another, but I printed up a quote from Gabor Mate and stuck it on the wall in one of the treatment centers that I worked at in Alberta. And the quote was, "The road to hell is not paved with good intentions; it's paved with a lack of intention."
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, moving forward in an unconscious way in your life is what gets you nowhere. It gets you lost. And at that center, what we were teaching basically, and what we were trying to do, was wake up these guys who are sleepwalking through their lives. And that's what addiction is. It's like a sleepwalk. It's a nightmare.
Yeah.
And the process of recovery is a waking up. And so what we were doing is like trying to bring consciousness up, bring it up. And that's what psychedelics do in many cases. That's what float tanks do. Like, I'm not surprised that the float tanks were super impactful for you, because they were for me. It actually, even though you're sitting there doing nothing, you're waking up. It's like you're going deeper and deeper into your mind and understanding it and learning to like be okay with it, you know? So yeah.
I'll just add that, you know, we support like anybody's path to recovery as well. It's not like psychedelics are the end all be all, but they can be profoundly beneficial for a lot of people. But if it's recovery groups that work for you, that's great, and stick with it. You know, if prescription medications are working for you, then that is great. Their medication is necessary in some cases. The integration of Western medicine and, you know, plant medicine is something that we view as critically important. And Adrianne really, in the film, she really talks about that at one point, where we you know, there's ups and downs in the documentary for those who haven't seen it, and that was one of them where we thought maybe we wouldn't even be continuing filming at that point, because things were getting challenging. But you know, if there was an integration, especially when you're dealing with like doctor prescribed opioids and you know, plant medicine that isn't really taught in medical school, well, if that could be integrated, it would make things a lot easier, a lot safer, and you know, there could be like pretty short and easy paths out of mental health and addiction issues. So yeah, like whatever it is for people, and we're just glad that DOSED is creating a safe space for people to have conversations around this topic, because communication is key. So like, it could be that somebody struggling, you know, like they watched the documentary with some friends or family, and now they're in a position where they can, like, you know, safely discuss these things like more openly, whereas in many cases, as we know with mental health, it's hidden, and then, you know, something terrible happens to somebody, and you know, people are like surprised because you can hide and mask your troubles so well. But if it was like a teenager having a discussion with their parents now because they sort of watch DOSED and they see that, it's like, it's okay to talk about mental health, what you're going through, your feelings, and you know, and maybe alternative therapies like psychedelics as well. So we think that's really important, that people you know, just choose what's right for them. Could be diet and eating better and exercise and staying hydrated. Like, all of these things add up, you know, to make people happier and healthier.
Right on, folks. Great discussion. I want to just go over, like, if I was to flood someone with resources, let's say this is the first thing they watch on this subject, and they're going to go and they're going to watch DOSED now. Now what? What else should they watch? Let's say they want to go down a rabbit hole. I was just thinking, like, what are my favorite recommendations for people? Like, yeah, you could watch the Goop Lab episode on Netflix with Gwyneth Paltrow, where she sends her team to go do psychedelics. There's Fantastic Fungi, which is another documentary it's not like fully released yet. I think they're still doing screenings. They're probably still in their process, similar to you guys.
They're on Vimeo as well, so similar situation.
So good. Fantastic Fungi, so good. Trip of Compassion, which is about MDMA and trauma. There's Gabor Mate's video that was done. Like, man, it must have been like 10 years ago. He did a National Geographic, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, wasn't it the Nature of Things?
Nature of Things.
The Nature of Things.
I forget. We were just talking about that the other day, and I forget what the name of it is, but you can Google it.
Jungle Prescription.
Yes, Jungle Prescription. That's it. Yeah. Yeah, that's the first thing I ever saw. That was the first time I had ever heard about psychedelics or any of this, was through that Nature of Things documentary. So definitely recommend that.
I like Inside Out. It's that animated film about all the feelings, and the girl moves and becomes depressed.
Yep.
And I think that's a great one, because you can show that to your kids, and I think that might allow children to understand, hopefully, that if they feel sad or angry, like, there's reasons for it, and it's okay to feel certain ways, and to talk about things, and just don't get stuck in those ways. And we had a lady attend one of our screenings. She was a psychologist, and she brought her 4 kids, and I believe it was 8, 10, 12, and 14. So she brought an 8-year-old to see DOSED. And I'm like thinking all along, like, DOSED is for the children, in the sense of, like, maybe more for teens, because it does sort of show, like, what path you could go down. Maybe you start drinking with your friends as a teenager, like Adrianne and most people do. But if you start to use that as an escape, maybe you can sort of see where it could end up if you don't, like, reel it back in. So I asked her a bit about that, and obviously, like, she's trying to educate her children and make sure that they understand things. So, like, I don't know if 8 years old is too young, or, like, maybe it's just right for that kid. There's a little bit of language in DOSED, but other than that, it's this, like, sort of challenging struggle. But certainly for, like, teens, just to, like, check it out, and that's the right age where people can go down the wrong path. But Inside Out, though, is obviously a kid's movie, but as an adult watching it, it's, like, super well done, very interesting. And obviously I think it's Pixar, Disney, or whatever, same company now. Like, it's nicely done and very well, like, thought out and researched.
By the way, they are making another film about, I think it's a little girl who dies and goes into the spirit world.
Oh, wow.
And they sort of show her journey, like, going up these steps. Like, I can't remember everything about it, but I was just, like, getting shivers watching it.
Wow.
Sidebar.
The Have a Good Trip on Netflix, I actually quite enjoyed too. It's a lot lighter. It's just, like, kind of a fun, but it's got some good information, I think. So, yeah.
I think that helps destigmatize psychedelics, because it's, like, showing celebrities who have taken psychedelics talking about their past experiences, where, DOSED is following a journey that actually is crazy. We didn't even know how it was going to end up, and Nick and I just, we're supporting Adrianne as the primary goal, and then we keep filming, and it's just, like, at times it's like, oh my goodness, like, is this even going to work? But yeah, that's another way to another thing, I guess, to watch.
Neurons to Nirvana. Remember that one? You guys see that?
Yeah, we did.
I haven't seen that one.
When we started filming this documentary, we tried to do research to see, like, if this documentary had been done. And when we heard about Neurons to Nirvana and the other one,
psilocybin.
Yeah. What is the actual title of that one?
Shout out to our executive producer, Jay Barnhart, and his great film, A New Understanding, the science of psilocybin. It's about the trials for end-of-life anxiety.
Yeah, so they take a deeper dive into psychedelic or like the science and psychedelics. We have some of that in our film, but ours is, again, it's like following the journey versus, like, talking about it. Dose is the real shit. That's like going underground. It's illegal. We thought we'd have access to the clinical trial that Adrianne had heard about way back before she ever took her first dose of mushrooms, but unfortunately that was going to take place the clinical trial was going to take place in like maybe 4 or 5 months. And Adrianne said she didn't want to wait because she didn't even know if she would make it that long, because taking fentanyl laced heroin is very dangerous. People are overdosing all the time. So, thankfully she had the courage and also the sense to realize like it's not going to happen. And it's not going to happen soon enough for her, but also like, she's like, I don't even know if it'll happen in early 2018. And, and we're like, well, that's what they said. But I guess Adrianne had a better understanding of like how clinical trials work. And the interesting thing is that clinical trial still has not started more than 2 years later. And, if we were waiting for the clinical trial, we wouldn't, Adrianne never would have even have tried a psychedelic yet. And she would have been stuck in this very destructive pattern. And, it's kind of scary to think about what might happen. And this is unfortunately happening to so many people where they're stuck, they don't have access. So we hope that like the current clinical trials that are going on in other places will open the doorways, get clinics like what you were talking about open. Nick and I are thinking about the same sort of thing, like what happens going forward now, right? And wouldn't it be great to just help sort of be advocates and like obviously with the film showing people that there's potentially a different way, and then also like them bringing that into like the legal sort of mainstream and where people can feel safe and comfortable to access it.
Great, guys. Let's keep moving forward. Let's support each other. And I think we have the same agenda. So so people can follow you on Instagram at Dosed Movie.
And it's at Dosed Movie on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
And
then you've got the website, dosedmovie.com.
Yep. You can follow us there, sign up to the mailing list for, like updates. You can obviously like rent or own the documentary on our website, dosedmovie.com. You can also purchase, we had these like custom magic mushroom necklaces made from like real magic mushrooms. And if they were made here in Vancouver as well, like not in China or overseas. So they're kind of like a little craft piece of jewelry. They're pretty cool. And right now, while the supplies last, if you buy one of those, you can own Dosed for free. So it's another thing you can do there.
And leave a review on IMDb, folks.
Yeah, get that up and get those. We love to hear those stories. So like people will email us and stuff, and it's like if you put it on IMDb, like we'll get the message there as well, because like obviously we check it out, and so will all the other people in the film. They go there and they like to read, like what people are saying, what their own experiences are, why this is meaningful for them. It's like a nice sort of thing, and then that'll help hopefully open more doorways for more people to see this documentary in the future.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Nick, Tyler, Adrianne, thank you for coming onto the show. This was a really good conversation.
Yeah,
thanks so much.
Really great.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, folks. Good luck with your agenda, and I've got your backs.
Same to you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben.
As well.
Thank you.